Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into a world where feeling a bit overwhelmed wasn't just a bad day. It was a full-blown medical mystery involving your internal organs playing a game of hide-and-seek. Imagine you are standing on a cobblestone street in 1890s London. The fog is thick enough to chew on, and your corset is tightened to the point where your ribs are basically having an intimate conversation with your spine. You feel that familiar flutter of panic, a bit of the vapours, as they called it, and suddenly you're being whisked away to a velvet-draped office to be diagnosed with hysteria. Honestly, between the lead-based makeup and the lack of basic human rights, you probably wouldn't survive a single weekend in this era without wanting to scream into a silk pillow. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I love hearing from you, so please drop a comment below letting me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're sitting in a heavy mahogany chair, the kind that feels like it's judging your posture. Across from you is a doctor with whiskers so large they deserve their own zip code, and he's looking at you with a mix of pity and profound confusion. To him, your anxiety isn't about the fact that you're forbidden from voting, or that your primary career option is walking in a garden while looking mournful. No, he suspects your nerves are simply frazzled because your brain is too small for big thoughts. Or perhaps your uterus has decided to take an unannounced trip to your ribcage. This was the peak of Victorian medical logic. If a woman felt anxious, it must be a mechanical failure of her femininity. You watch as he scribbles hysteria on a piece of parchment with a flourish, a catch-all term that historians still debate today, as it essentially covered every emotion from mildly annoyed to suffering a legitimate nervous breakdown. The room smells faintly of lavender and institutional boredom. The rest cure is often the first line of defense. You are told that for the next 6 weeks you aren't allowed to read, write, or even think about anything more complex than a bowl of plain porridge. It's like being grounded by the entire medical establishment. You're instructed to lie perfectly still in a darkened room, a treatment that sounds relaxing for the first 10 minutes, but quickly turns into a psychological endurance test. If you so much as reach for a book by Jane Austen, the doctor shakes his head, claiming that intellectual stimulation is the enemy of the female nervous system. It's the ultimate irony. To cure your anxiety, they've removed every possible distraction, leaving you alone with nothing but your anxious thoughts and the sound of a ticking clock that seems to be mocking your very existence. One of the stranger, lesser-known facts of these Victorian clinics was the belief that brain congestion could be cured by applying leeches to the temples or behind the ears. You might find yourself lying there, eyes closed, trying to relax while a small, slimy invertebrate attempts to suck the excess nervousness right out of your blood. It's an absurd image. You, a sophisticated lady of the Gilded Age, acting as a juice box for a swamp dweller. Yet this was considered high-end therapy. The doctors truly believed that by reducing the blood flow to the head, they could stop the overactive imagination that caused women to worry about trivial things, like, their own lives. As you lie there, the silence of the clinic is heavy. There are no smartphones to scroll through, no podcasts to drown out the quiet, just the occasional distant clatter of a horse-drawn carriage on the street below. You begin to realize that the treatment is almost worse than the ailment. The goal wasn't really to make you feel better, it was to make you quiet. A quiet woman was a healthy woman in the eyes of the 19th century medical board. You're encouraged to focus on feminine tasks once you're allowed to sit up, like arranging dried flowers or contemplating the intricate patterns of the wallpaper. Historians argue whether these doctors were genuinely trying to help or simply trying to enforce social order, but as you stare at a floral pattern for the 4th hour in a row, you're pretty sure it's the latter. You hear the soft rustle of the doctor's coat as he checks his pocket watch. He suggests a nerve tonic, a mysterious liquid in a cobalt blue bottle that likely contains a healthy dose of alcohol, a splash of opium, and perhaps a hint of hope. It's the original Mommy's Little Helper. After a few sips, the room feels a bit softer, the edges of your anxiety blur, and for a moment the fact that you're essentially a prisoner of your own gender roles doesn't seem quite so heavy. It's a temporary fog, a gentle chemical blanket that keeps the harsh reality of the world at bay. You start to feel your eyelids getting heavy, the mahogany furniture seems to melt into the shadows, and the doctor's voice becomes a distant, meaningless hum. The Victorian era might have been terrifyingly wrong about biology, but they certainly knew how to mix a drink that would put you to sleep before you could ask too many questions. As you drift closer to sleep, you think about how lucky you are to have a modern pillow instead of the stiff, horsehair-filled bolsters of this clinic. Your mind wanders to the next day's therapy, which involves a very slow walk in a very enclosed garden where you will be expected to admire a shrub with great intensity. It's all part of the grand plan to keep your delicate constitution from overheating. The absurdity of it all brings a small, sleepy smile to your face. You are a woman of the past, navigating a world of smelling salts and strange diagnoses, finding peace in the only way they'll let you, by simply closing your eyes and letting the Victorian fog swallow the day. The leeches have finished their meal, the tonic has done its work, and the dark room is finally truly quiet. The next morning, the heavy velvet curtains are pulled back just a crack, allowing a single, thin finger of sunlight to poke through the dusty air of your room. You are informed by a nurse, whose uniform is starched so stiffly it crackles like a forest fire with every step she takes, that today's treatment for your shattered nerves involves the outdoors. But don't get too excited. You aren't going for a brisk hike or a ride on one of those newfangled bicycles. No, that would be far too much excitement for your fragile heart. Instead, you are being prescribed a passive garden perambulation. You are led downstairs, your feet feeling heavy in leather boots that offer zero arch support, and ushered into a walled garden designed specifically to be as boring as humanly possible. The philosophy behind this was simple. If the world was causing you anxiety, the solution was to look at things that moved very slowly. You find yourself standing before a flower bed of pale peonies and weeping willows. The doctor explains that the colour green is sedative to the feminine eye, a scientific fact he likely pulled out of thin air while eating his morning toast. You are instructed to walk at a pace that can only be described as glacial. If you accidentally walk fast enough to break a sweat, the nurse tsk and reminds you that perspiration is the cousin of agitation. Honestly, with the amount of layers you're wearing, the chemise, the corset, the petticoat and the heavy wool dress, you probably wouldn't survive a light jog without needing a medical team and a gallon of lemonade. So you walk, step, pause, contemplate a pebble, step. The garden is a masterpiece of Victorian repression. Every hedge is trimmed into a perfect unmoving cube, and even the fountain seems to drip with a sort of polite muted restraint. Interestingly, historians have found that these healing gardens were often the only places where women could speak to one another without a male chaperone hovering nearby, though the conversation usually had to be whispered over the scent of damp earth and roses. You might find yourself leaning toward a fellow hysteric near the hydrangeas, only to discover she's also been sent here because she had the audacity to suggest that she enjoyed reading mathematics. You share a look of silent, weary solidarity before the nurse clears her throat, signalling that excessive socializing is also a form of nervous overstimulation. As you meander, you notice a strange sight in the corner of the garden, a sunbox. This was a peculiar 19th century invention where patients were placed in a wooden crate with only their heads sticking out, left to soak up the sun's rays. The theory was that the sun would bake out the melancholy. It's an absurdly funny image, a row of women's heads appearing to grow out of the ground like very grumpy cabbages, all being cured by the sheer force of boredom and vitamin D. You're thankful you've been assigned the walking path instead of the cabbage patch today. One of the lesser-known facts about these garden therapies was the inclusion of scented stations. You are led to a patch of crushed mint and told to breathe deeply for exactly 5 minutes. The doctors believed that different smells could realign the vapours floating around your internal cavities. Mint was for clarity, lavender was for the sorrows, and rosemary was for the wandering mind. You find yourself staring at a snail making its way across a stone path. You start to feel a strange sense of envy. The snail doesn't have to worry about societal expectations, or whether its hat is at the correct angle, or if its nerves are making the men in the household uncomfortable. It just exists. This was the unintended side effect of the Victorian rest and garden cure. It gave women a vast amount of time to simply observe the minute details of the natural world. Some historians argue that this enforced quietude actually led to a secret boom in amateur botany among women, as they had nothing else to do but study every stamen and pistil in sight. You pick up a fallen leaf and examine its veins, feeling a genuine, if forced, sense of calm. But then the gentle humour of the era strikes again. The doctor wanders out to check your progress and suggests that perhaps you should try the swing. Not a fun playground swing, mind you, but a medically sanctioned, oscillating chair. You are strapped into a wooden seat that is slowly rocked back and forth by a disgruntled footman. The goal is to use centrifugal force to settle your brain back into its proper place. As you rock back and forth, staring at the same rosebush over and over, you realise that the Victorians were essentially trying to treat adults like very large, very anxious babies. If they could just rock you, feed you bland food, and keep you in a pretty garden, surely your desire for independence or your anxiety about the future would just evaporate. The air begins to cool as the sun dips behind the high brick walls. Your exercise is over. You've walked a total of maybe 400 yards in 2 hours, and your primary takeaway is that the colour pink is surprisingly aggressive when you're forced to look at it for too long. You are led back inside, the rustle of your skirts acting as the soundtrack to your return to the restroom. Your mind is a bit quieter now, but mostly because it's been numbed by the sheer repetition of the afternoon. You remember a detail from your doctor's lecture earlier, that some experts believed the wind blowing from the east was particularly dangerous for women's nerves. You check the weather vane on the way in, feeling a surge of relief that it's pointing west. As you climb the stairs, your legs feel that pleasant heavy ache that comes from doing almost nothing very intensely. The garden, with its head cabbages and therapeutic mint, fades into the evening shadows. You think about the ancient Egyptians, whom you heard the doctor mention in passing, and how they supposedly used go, bear fat, to treat similar female complaints. Compared to that, a slow walk and a rocking chair don't seem quite so bad. You settle back into your bed, the horsehair mattress feeling a little more familiar now. The nurse returns with a glass of warm milk, laced with a digestive powder that tastes vaguely of chalk and old dreams. You close your eyes, and the image of the garden snail returns to you, slowly, navigating its way through a world that is far too complicated for its own good. You follow its lead, sliding into a deep garden-scented sleep where no one can tell you to walk any slower than you already are. You wake up to the rhythmic sound of a distant gong, a sound that feels like it's vibrating through the very soles of your feet. As you blink away the remnants of your Victorian garden dreams, the air around you shifts. It's no longer the damp, floral scent of London. It's something heavier, older, and far more complex. The atmosphere is thick with the smell of myrrh, roasted barley, and the unmistakable, musky tang of the Nile. You realise you've travelled back much further than the 19th century. You are now a woman of high standing in ancient Egypt, perhaps a daughter of a scribe or a weaver in the shadow of the Great Pyramid. And while the scenery has changed, your anxiety, or what they call the heaving of the heart, is still something the local healers are very eager to fix. You're currently lying on a linen-wrapped headrest that is essentially a curved piece of wood. It's about as comfortable as sleeping on a brick, and you're fairly certain you wouldn't survive a full night on this without a serious neck adjustment. Before you can even complain about the ergonomics, a priest healer enters, his head shaved smooth and gleaming with a thin layer of oil. He doesn't bring a stethoscope or a rocking chair. Instead, he carries a small, ornate jar made of alabaster. Inside is the miracle cure for your restless spirit, a thick, greyish ointment made primarily from mergau, bear fat. Apparently, in the eyes of an Egyptian doctor, The strength and grounded nature of a bear could be transferred to a nervous human through their paws. You watch, half amused and half horrified, as he begins to slather this heavy grease onto your forehead and neck. It's incredibly sticky, and you have the sudden modern thought that this is definitely going to cause a breakout that no amount of clay masks can fix. But in this era, looking like a shiny, bear-scented statue is the height of medical sophistication. The Egyptians were masters of the sensory soak. To calm your racing mind, they didn't just stop at bear fat. The healer begins to light small cones of incense made from kifi, a legendary blend of 16 ingredients including honey, wine, raisins, and juniper berries. The smoke curls around you in lazy, hypnotic spirals. There's a certain gentle humour in the fact that while they were incredibly advanced in surgery and mathematics, their cure for stress involved turning you into a human potpourri. Historians still debate the exact chemical composition of some of these ancient resins, but as you breathe it in, the edge of your worry begins to soften. It's hard to stay anxious when you're being treated like a sacred temple offering. As the bear fat sinks in, the healer starts to recite a series of incantations. In ancient Egypt, medicine and magic weren't just neighbours, they lived in the same house. He speaks to the hidden winds inside your body, commanding the demons of unrest to exit through your fingertips. You feel a strange, tingly sensation, which might be the magic working, or it might just be the fact that the bear fat is starting to itch. One of the lesser-known facts about Egyptian mental health care was their obsession with dream incubation. If the ointments and spells didn't work, you were often sent to a sanatorium within a temple complex. These weren't hospitals in the modern sense. They were beautiful, dim halls where you were encouraged to sleep so that the gods could whisper the cure directly into your dreams. It's basically a high-stakes version of Sleeping on It, with the added pressure of having to report back to a priest about whether a cat-headed goddess gave you any good advice. You find yourself led to a small, private alcove near a pool of lotus flowers. The sound of water trickling over limestone is the original white noise machine. You're given a small bowl of beer, thick, nutritious, and slightly sweet, mixed with a pinch of powdered malachite. The doctor claims this will cool the liver, which they believed was the seat of many emotions. You take a sip, and it's surprisingly refreshing, though you can't help but think that a modern doctor would probably have some notes on the whole drinking ground-up minerals part of the prescription. You lean back against the cool stone wall, watching the dragonflies zip across the water. The pace of life here is dictated by the sun and the river, not by a ticking clock or a demanding social calendar. It's enforced slowness that, much like the Victorian garden, starts to seep into your bones. But even here, there are rules we follow for no reason. You are told that to truly banish your anxiety, you must avoid eating certain types of fish for 3 days, as their scales might clutter the channels of the soul. It's a beautifully poetic way of saying they have no idea why you're stressed, so they're taking away your sushi privileges. You find yourself nodding along anyway, too relaxed by the incense and the heat to argue. There's a peculiar comfort in being told exactly what to do, even if it involves bear fat and fish bands. It removes the burden of choice, which is often the heaviest part of anxiety. You start to feel a deep, grounding connection to the earth beneath you, a feeling that you're just one small part of a cycle that has been spinning for thousands of years. As the sun begins to set, casting a golden-orange glow over the sandstone pillars, the healer returns to wipe away the excess grease with a soft linen cloth. Your skin feels tingly and warm. He leaves you with a final piece of advice. Look to the horizon where the sun meets the earth, for there is the balance you seek. It's a bit cliché, even for 2000 BC, but in the quiet of the temple, it feels profound. You remember the Victorian doctor from your previous life and his leeches, and you realise that every civilization has its own strange way of trying to bottle peace. Whether it's through bloodletting or bear fat, the goal is always the same: to find a way to quiet the noise inside. You settle back onto your linen mat, the wooden headrest feeling surprisingly tolerable now that your neck has gone slightly numb. The sound of the Nile's evening insects creates a steady, vibrating hum that acts like a lullaby. You think about the wandering uterus, theory you'll encounter later in ancient Greece, and you feel a surge of gratitude that for now your internal organs are considered settled. The scent of kiffy lingers on your skin, a sweet, smoky reminder of a day spent doing nothing but being healed. You close your eyes, the golden light of Egypt fading into a soft, velvety black. Your heart is no longer heaving, it's steady, slow, and ready to drift into the deepest parts of the night. Guided by the scent of ancient resins and the quiet magic of the desert. The warm desert air of Egypt begins to cool, but instead of the dry chill of the dunes, you feel a salty, invigorating breeze. You open your eyes to find yourself reclining on a marble chaise, the white stones smooth and cool against your skin. The heavy scent of kifi has been replaced by the sharp, clean aroma of wild thyme, oregano, and the distant rhythmic crashing of the Mediterranean against a rocky shore. You are in ancient Greece, specifically a peaceful villa on the outskirts of Athens. But before you can admire the view of the Parthenon in the distance, you notice a familiar sense of the jitters in your chest. In this era, however, they don't blame your brain or your social standing. Instead, a physician in a crisp linen chiton approaches you with a look of intense scientific curiosity, ready to explain that your anxiety is caused by your wandering uterus. Yes, the Greeks, for all their brilliance in philosophy and geometry, held a very literal belief that a woman's internal organs had a mind of their own and would occasionally go for a stroll if they weren't kept happy. Your doctor explains that your recent bouts of worry and restlessness are simply because your internal center has migrated upward toward your heart, seeking moisture. It sounds like something out of a surrealist comedy, and you might find yourself suppressing a laugh at the idea of your organs acting like tourists in your own body. You probably wouldn't survive the urge to point out how illogical this is, but in a world where Zeus is regularly turning into various animals, a traveling uterus seems relatively grounded. To treat this migration, the Greek medical establishment has a very specific and frankly quite aromatic solution. The goal is to lure the organ back to its proper place using a technique of scent-based attraction and repulsion. You are instructed to sit over a small brazier where foul-smelling substances like sulfur or burnt wool are being singed, the idea being that the wandering organ will want to move away from the unpleasant odor. Meanwhile, you are given sweet-smelling garlands of jasmine and roses to hold near your lap, acting as a fragrant welcome-home mat. It's an elaborate game of scent-based navigation that leaves you smelling like a strange mix of a flower shop and a campfire gone wrong. Historians still chuckle over these texts, noting that while the Greeks were pioneers of anatomy, their theories on female emotion were essentially a high-stakes version of follow your nose. As you sit there, surrounded by your floral lures, the doctor suggests a dialogue of the soul. Unlike the Victorian rest cure, which demanded total silence, the Greeks believed in the power of gentle, rhythmic speech. A young assistant begins to read aloud from the Odyssey, not the violent parts, of course, but the long, rolling descriptions of the sea and the stars. The cadence of the Greek language, with its musical vowels and soft consonants, acts like a linguistic massage for your nerves. There's a certain gentle humor in being told that the cure for your panic is a 4-hour poetry reading, but as the verses flow, you find your breathing slowing down to match the meter of the poem. One of the lesser-known facts about Greek mental health was their belief in musical purge. The doctor brings in a musician playing a kithara, a type of ancient lyre. He explains that different musical scales or modes have the power to reshape the humours of the body. He plays the Phrygian mode to invigorate, but then quickly switches to the Dorian mode to stabilize. It's the ancient equivalent of a lo-fi beats to relax study to playlist, but with more marble and fewer headphones. You close your eyes, letting the vibrations of the strings hum through the air. The Greeks believed that the universe was built on harmony and proportion, and by exposing you to perfect music, they were trying to tune your internal strings back to their proper pitch. Between the poetry and the music, you are offered a snack of honey-soaked figs and a watered-down wine. The Greeks were very big on dilution. They thought drinking wine straight was for barbarians and would lead to immediate mental overheating. You nibble on a fig, the sweetness grounding you, while the doctor explains that historians still debate whether the Greek obsession with balance was a result of their wisdom or a desperate attempt to control a world that felt constantly chaotic. You find yourself agreeing with the balance part. There is something deeply soothing about a culture that prescribes wine, music, and poetry for a bad case of the nerves. It's a holistic approach that, despite the wandering organ nonsense, treats you as a creature of art and intellect. As the afternoon sun turns the marble pillars to a soft, glowing gold, you are led to a small, private courtyard with a shallow pool of turquoise water. Here, you are encouraged to practice still contemplation. You sit by the water's edge, watching the ripples move in perfect circles. There are no clocks here, only the shifting shadow of the sundial in the center of the court. You realize that your anxiety thrives on the feeling of running out of time. But here, time feels infinite, stretching out like the horizon of the Aegean. The Greek word for leisure is skole, which eventually gave us the word school. For them, the highest form of human activity was simply having the time to think and be at peace. You feel a strange, weightless sensation, as if the heavy vapours the Egyptians worried about have finally evaporated into the thin Grecian air. The wandering part of you feels settled, not because of the sulphur or the jasmine, but because you've been given permission to simply exist in harmony with the world around you. The musician plays one final, low note on the lyre, and the sound seems to hang in the air long after the string stops vibrating. You lean back against the cool marble, your body feeling as solid and serene as a statue. As you drift towards sleep, the sound of the Mediterranean waves becomes a constant low-frequency hum. You think about the rest cure gardens and the bear fat ointments, and you realize that even though the theories change, the human need for a quiet port remains the same. The scent of wild thyme is the last thing you notice before the world fades into a hazy Athenian blue. Your thoughts become as light as sea foam, drifting away from the shore of the day and out into the vast starlit ocean of the night. You are no longer a patient or a project. You are just a soul in repose, lulled by the ancient rhythms of a world that knows exactly how to find its way home. The crisp, salty air of the Aegean begins to soften, shifting from the open sea to the earthy, enclosed scent of a 19th century larder. You open your eyes to find yourself in a kitchen that looks like a laboratory for the remarkably bland. Gone are the honeyed figs and diluted wines of Greece. In their place is a wooden table set with a single unadorned bowl of graham crackers and a glass of lukewarm water. You are now in the mid-1800s, living through the height of the dietary reform movement. Your doctor, a man who likely views a black pepper flake as a dangerous hallucinogen, has decided that your anxiety is not caused by a wandering organ, but by a fiery stomach. In this era, the path to a calm mind is paved with the most boring food imaginable. The logic of the time, championed by figures like Sylvester Graham, the namesake of your cracker, was that stimulating foods, spices, meats, and even white bread, were the direct cause of nervous irritability and unnatural excitement. If you felt anxious, it was clearly because you had dared to eat a seasoned sausage. You sit there, looking at your beige meal, while a stern-faced housekeeper explains that the tongue is the gateway to the soul's unrest. You probably wouldn't survive a week on this diet without smuggling in a jar of mustard, but for now, you are a dutiful patient of the bland. You take a bite of the cracker. It's dry, crunchy, and tastes like a very clean cardboard box. Surprisingly, there's a strange meditative quality to eating something so utterly devoid of excitement. This was the era of temperance in all things, where the goal was to keep the body in a state of permanent lukewarm neutrality. To treat your anxiety, you are prescribed a cooling diet. This involves a steady rotation of boiled potatoes, unseasoned grains, and perhaps a very brave apple if you're feeling particularly wild. One of the lesser-known facts about this period is that many of these reformers believed that the very act of chewing vigorously could exhaust the nervous system, so you are encouraged to mush your food into a sort of tranquil paste. It's a beautifully absurd sight, a room full of Victorian ladies slowly mashing their dinner as if they're trying to prevent a culinary uprising. Historians still debate whether these diets actually helped, or if people just became too tired from lack of calories to feel anxious anymore. As you sit in the quiet kitchen, the only sound is the rhythmic thud-thud of a butter churn in the corner. The reformers believed that manual, repetitive tasks were a form of active meditation. You are handed a small bowl of peas and told to shell them. One by one you pop the pods, the small green spheres rolling into the ceramic bowl with a satisfying clink. It's a tactile, sensory experience that forces your mind to narrow its focus. Your brain congestion, that heavy racing feeling in your forehead, starts to dissipate, replaced by the simple singular goal of emptying the pile of pods. There's a gentle humour in the idea that the cure for existential dread is a mountain of legumes, but you can't deny that the repetitive motion is doing more for you than the leeches ever did. One of the strange rules we follow for no reason in this dietary era was the absolute ban on hot liquids. Your tea is served at room temperature as heat was thought to inflame the vapours and lead to spontaneous bouts of weeping or, heaven forbid, an opinion. You sip your tepid herbal infusion, likely made from chamomile or valerian root, and feel the coolness settle in your chest. The physician stops by to check your gastric temperament. He explains that a calm stomach is a quiet heart, a phrase that sounds like a precursor to modern gut-brain science, even if his methods involve a lot more boiled cabbage than we'd like. Between the shelling of peas and the eating of crackers, you are encouraged to practice rhythmic breathing by the window. You watch the laundry swaying on the line outside, the white sheets snapping softly in the breeze. The goal is to synchronize your breath with the movement of the fabric. In this world, everything is designed to lower your internal RPM. You are told that modern life, meaning the terrifying speed of the steam engine and the frenzy of the daily newspaper, is simply too much for the female constitution to process. By stripping away the spice, the heat, and the news, they are trying to turn you into a human blank slate. As the evening light fades, casting long dusty shadows across the floorboards, you feel a profound sense of emptiness, not just in your stomach but in your mind. The noise of your anxiety has been starved out. You remember the bare fat of Egypt and the sulphur smoke of Greece, and you realize that this 19th century approach is perhaps the most peaceful kind of torture. There are no demons to exorcise, no organs to lure back. There is only the quiet, the cool water, and the endless pile of peas. You head upstairs to your room, your footsteps light and a bit shaky from the lack of stimulating protein. Your bed is made with crisp, unbleached linen that smells of sunlight and lye. You settle in, feeling remarkably like one of those dry crackers, simple, uncomplicated, and very still. The housekeeper leaves a final glass of water on your nightstand, reminding you that dreams are the reflection of the last meal. If that's true, you're in for a very beige, very quiet night of sleep. You close your eyes, the image of a single rolling green pea dancing in your mind. The world is no longer a fiery, anxious place. It is a cool, quiet larder, and you are tucked away on the shelf, perfectly preserved and ready to drift into a dreamless, spice-free slumber. The cool, sterile larder of the dietary reformers begins to transform, the smell of boiled potatoes giving way to the rich, dusty scent of old wool and beeswax. You find yourself sitting in a high-backed chair near a frosted window, a heavy wooden frame resting across your lap. You are in the mid-18th century, and your cure for a restless mind has taken a turn toward the domestic. You are being prescribed the discipline of the needle. In this era, if a woman of your status felt the weight of the world pressing in, the answer wasn't to speak about it, but to sew it away, one tiny, agonizingly precise stitch at a time. You hold a needle so fine it feels like a splinter of frozen light. Before you is a piece of fine silk, and your task is to embroider a scene of a weeping willow. Ironic, considering that's exactly how you feel inside. The physician, a man who wears a powdered wig that looks like a nesting site for very organized birds, explains that the wandering mind is best tethered by the tip of a needle. There is a gentle humor in the fact that they've decided to treat your anxiety by forcing you to perform a task that requires the steady hands of a diamond cutter and the patience of a saint. You probably wouldn't survive an hour of this without accidentally stabbing yourself and ruining the silk. But here, the silence of the room is absolute, and the expectation is clear. You must be still. This was the age of forced tranquility. The room is filled with other women, all bent over their frames, the only sound being the soft swish-pull of silk thread through fabric. It's a collective, silent endurance test. One of the lesser-known facts of this period is that embroidery fatigue was a genuine medical concern, yet it was still preferred over the hysteria that might arise if a woman were left with nothing to do but think. You are told that by focusing your eyes on the minute intersection of threads, you are grounding your spirit to the physical world. Historians often point out that these needlework sessions were essentially a form of 18th century flow state, though one enforced by social pressure rather than personal choice. As you work, you notice the details of the room. The fireplace flickers with a low, steady flame, and the scent of beeswax candles fills the air. You start to find a rhythm. Push, pull, knot. The anxiety that felt like a tangled nest in your chest begins to unravel as you focus on the tangles in your thread. It's a strange paradox. The very thing that should be stressful, this intense microscopic work, becomes a shield against the larger worries of life. You can't worry about the future when you're worried about the symmetry of a willow leaf. Every few hours, the silence master, usually a stern aunt or a hired governess, allows for measured discourse. You are permitted to speak, but only about improving subjects. No gossip, no politics, and certainly no mention of your nerves. You might talk about the history of the tapestry you're mimicking, or the botanical properties of the silk oak. It's a linguistic diet as bland as the crackers of the previous century. You find yourself whispering to the woman next to you about a strange fact you heard, that some sailors believe mermaids are just lonely manatees, and for a second a spark of genuine laughter lightens the room. But the silence master clears her throat, and you go back to your willow tree, the secret joke tucked away like a hidden stitch. There was a theory in this era that the vapours could be trapped within the intricate patterns of lace. You watch your needle dive in and out, creating a net of white thread. You start to imagine that with every stitch you are pinning down a worried thought, trapping it forever in the silk. It's a comforting, if slightly gothic, idea. By the time the sun begins to set, your eyes are tired and your fingers are stiff, but the frantic humming in your brain has slowed to a dull, manageable buzz. You've replaced your anxiety with a tangible object, a piece of art that proves you were calm for 6 hours straight. As the candles are snuffed out one by one, the room falls into a deep, velvety blue. You are led to your bed, which is draped in the very same kind of heavy embroidery you've been working on. The weight of the quilts feels like a final decisive stitch, holding you in place. You think about the Greek lyre and the Egyptian incense, and you realize that whether it's music or mogao or embroidery, we are all just looking for a way to tie our wandering thoughts to something solid. You close your eyes, the phantom sensation of the needle still tingly in your fingertips. The weeping willow is finished, the silk is smooth, and you drift into a sleep that is as intricate and quiet as a piece of fine lace. The delicate, dusty smell of embroidery, silk and beeswax slowly evaporates, replaced by the grand, dizzying scent of expensive perfumes, floor wax, and the faint, metallic tang of an early electric elevator. You open your eyes and find yourself standing in the middle of a marble-clad palace of commerce. It is the year 1905, and you are inside one of the world's first great department stores. For the modern woman of the Edwardian era, the city is a frantic, noisy place, filled with the clatter of horse hooves on pavement and the terrifying roar of the new motor cars. Your doctor has suggested that your anxiety is a result of urban overstimulation, and your prescription is a day of quiet shopping, punctuated by long visits to the restrooms. These were not bathrooms in the modern sense. No, these were lush, carpeted cathedrals of silence tucked away on the upper floors of stores like Selfridges or Marshall Field's. You walk across a rug so thick it swallows the sound of your footsteps, heading toward a velvet chaise longue. The manager of the department, a man with a mustache so perfectly waxed it looks like it was carved from mahogany, bows to you. He explains that the modern lady's nerves are like a delicate watch, too much ticking in the city, and she must be rewound. You probably wouldn't survive the sheer absurdity of needing a special velvet room just because you saw a loud bus. But in 1905, this is the height of therapeutic luxury. You sink into the chaise, and a restroom attendant brings you a small silver tray with a cup of malted milk and a single lavender-scented cooling pad for your forehead. One of the lesser-known facts about these spaces was that they were designed with chromotherapy in mind. The walls are painted a very specific shade of Nile green, which was believed to be the most tranquilizing color for the human retina. You stare at the green walls, feeling like you're inside a very large, very expensive lime. Historians still debate whether these rooms were a genuine attempt to help women or just a clever marketing ploy to keep them in the store longer so they'd buy more lace doilies. Either way, as you lie there, the frantic energy of the street below feels like it's 1,000 miles away. The quiet chronicles of this era describe the rest room as a place where the only permitted activity was low-intensity browsing. You are handed a catalogue of silent silks and encouraged to look at the textures without actually making any decisions. The goal is to engage your senses without triggering your executive vapors. You find yourself tracing the image of a parasol with your finger, the repetitive motion acting as a digital lullaby. There's a gentle humor in the idea that you are too delicate to handle the stress of choosing between two types of ribbon, yet you are perfectly capable of navigating a 3-story building full of chandeliers. Between your bouts of resting, you are encouraged to visit the in-store aviary. Many of these grand stores kept exotic birds in large, gilded cages near the resting areas. You watch a pair of pale yellow canaries hopping from branch to branch, their soft chirping acting as the 1900s version of a white noise machine. You are told that the song of a bird resonates with the natural frequencies of the feminine spirit. It's a beautiful, if entirely made-up sentiment. You lean your head back, watching the light from the stained glass ceiling dance on the floorboards. The department store has become your sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the Industrial Revolution is filtered through silk and bird song. One of the rules we follow for no reason in these restrooms was the no-hat mandate. To truly relax, you must remove your enormous feathered Edwardian hat, a feat that often required the removal of 10 or 12 long, dangerous-looking hat pins. As you set your hat aside, you feel a physical weight lift from your head. The attendant whispers that a heavy hat leads to a heavy heart, a piece of folk wisdom that, for once, feels entirely accurate. With your hair finally free from its structural constraints, you feel the tension in your scalp begin to melt away. As the afternoon light begins to dim, turning the Nile green walls into a deep mossy shadow, you feel a sense of profound, quiet contentment. You've successfully shopped for peace. You remember the Victorian garden and the Greek marble, and you realize that every age builds its own temple for the anxious mind. Today, yours is made of department store velvet and malted milk. You feel ready to face the street again, but only for the short walk to your carriage. You settle back for one last moment of stillness before the store closes. The faint scent of the lavender pad lingers on your skin, and the memory of the canaries' song follows you into your thoughts. You close your eyes, the image of the green walls fading into a soft, dark forest. The city outside can roar all it wants. You are tucked away in the quietest corner of the world, safe among the silks and the shadows, drifting into a sleep that is as smooth and calm as a roll of unspooled ribbon. The grand electric hum of the department store fades, and the air around you grows heavy, still, and dimly lit. You are back in the mid-19th century, perhaps in a cosy parlour with a fire crackling in the hearth, but the atmosphere isn't exactly cheerful. It is the era of the apothecary's solution. You find yourself sitting in a plush armchair, holding a small, cobalt-blue glass bottle. The label is handwritten in elegant loopy script, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. You are living in a time when the answer to a troubled mind or a fretful spirit was often found at the bottom of a very small, very potent bottle of tonic. Your physician, a man who believes that agitation of the soul is merely a chemical imbalance of the nerves, has prescribed you a nightly spoonful of this mysterious elixir. As you uncork the bottle, a sweet, herbal, and slightly medicinal scent wafts out, a mixture of anise, sugar, and the unmistakable, earthy undertone of opium. In this century, the tonic was the universal cure-all. Whether you were worried about your household budget or mourning a lost love, the local pharmacist was more than happy to provide a liquid blanket for your brain. You probably wouldn't survive the modern-day regulatory fallout of drinking this stuff like it was tea, but right now, it's the gold standard of calm. You take a small sip from a silver spoon. The liquid is thick and syrupy, coating your throat with a warm, numbing sweetness. Within minutes, the edges of the room begin to soften. The sharp flicker of the fire becomes a gentle, glowing pulse, and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway slows down until it matches the lazy rhythm of your own heart. This was the opium era, where the boundary between medicine and reverie was paper-thin. Historians still marvel at how common these tonics were, given to everyone from restless infants to anxious grandmothers, creating a society that was, for better or worse, very, very relaxed. As the tonic takes hold, you find yourself engaging in stationary travel. Since you are far too mellow to actually go anywhere, you flip through a book of stereoscope cards. These double images, when viewed through a special wooden lens, create a 3D effect of distant lands, the pyramids of Egypt, the mountains of Switzerland, the ruins of Rome. You sit there, travelling the world from the comfort of your armchair, feeling as though you are floating through these landscapes rather than just looking at them. There's a gentle humour in the fact that you're exploring the Alps while you can barely feel your own toes. One of the lesser-known facts about these 19th century tonics was that they were often marketed as vitality restorers. The idea was that by numbing your anxiety, the tonic was allowing your vital force to replenish itself. You watch the shadows of the fire tongs dance on the wall, and they look like strange, spindly dancers. You aren't afraid, you're just curious. The rules we follow for no reason in this era dictate that you must always take your tonic with a biscuit of plain flour to settle the stomach. You nibble on the dry biscuit, the crunch sounding like a distant explosion in your quiet, hazy world. The physician mentioned that the vapours of the mind are like a stormy sea, and the tonic is the oil that stills the waves. It's a poetic way of saying you're currently too sedated to care if the house is on fire. You feel a deep, heavy stillness in your limbs, a sensation of being anchored to the earth by invisible weights of velvet. You remember the rest rooms of the future and the embroidery frames of the past, and you realize that this liquid silence, is perhaps the most direct route to the void that anxiety sufferers have always craved. As the fire burns down to a collection of glowing red embers, the room grows colder, but you don't mind. You are wrapped in a cocoon of chemical peace. The cobalt bottle sits empty on the side table, reflecting the last of the light like a fallen star. You think about how the ancient Greeks used music to tune the soul, and you decide that your soul is currently tuned to a very low, very sweet hum. You lean your head back against the lace antimacassar on the chair. Your thoughts are no longer sentences, they are just colours and sensations. The blue of the bottle, the warmth of the spoon, the smell of anise. You drift towards sleep, not as a person with worries, but as a cloud drifting over a silent 19th century landscape. The tonic has done its work, the vapours have been stilled, and the night is a long, sweet, and perfectly quiet journey into the dark. The thick, syrupy haze of the apothecary's tonic begins to evaporate, replaced by the sharp, bracing scent of wet slate, cold steam, and a hint of mineral-rich spring water. You open your eyes to find yourself standing in a tiled hall that echoes with the sound of 1,000 dripping faucets. It is the mid-19th century again, but the parlour's warmth is gone. You are at a world-renowned water cure establishment, a hydropathic institute. Your doctor, a man who views cold water with the same religious fervour that a priest views holy water, has decided that your anxiety is caused by thermal stagnation. To fix your nerves, he believes your body needs to be shocked, soaked, and scrubbed into submission. You are currently wrapped in what they call a wet sheet pack. You are mummified from neck to toe in heavy linen sheets that have been soaked in ice-cold spring water and then layered with thick wool blankets. The initial shock made you gasp, a sound that echoed off the damp tiles, but now, after 10 minutes, a strange warmth begins to spread. Your body is fighting to heat that icy cocoon, creating a deep internal glow. The doctor explains that this process is drawing the toxic vapors from the nervous system out through your pores. You surely wouldn't survive this ordeal without a will of iron, but strangely, the sensation of being tightly bound combined with the rising heat brings an absolute stillness. You cannot move, you cannot fret, you can only exist. Hydrotherapy was a massive craze in the 1850s. Historians still debate whether this method actually cured psychological ailments or if the sheer thermal shock simply forced the brain to temporarily forget its troubles. Once you emerge from your cocoon, you are led to the douche royal. This isn't a relaxing home shower. It's a labyrinth of copper pipes surrounding you, blasting needle-like jets of water from every conceivable angle. There's a gentle humour in standing there, looking like a statue under siege by a tiny army of water cannons, while a stern nurse shouts encouragement that the flow is restructuring the electrical charge of your nerves. A lesser-known fact about these water cure institutes was the existence of the manual aerated bath. You sit in a large wooden tub, and 2 attendants use wooden paddles to vigorously churn the water around you, creating air bubbles they believe will massage the soul. The feeling of the water lapping against you, rhythmic and powerful, gradually replaces the initial shivering with a profound muscular release. You begin to feel like a pebble worn smooth by a stream over centuries, polished, cool, and stripped of the sharp edges of your anxiety. Between treatments, you are encouraged to take a dew walk. In the early morning light, you step out into the Institute's garden, feeling the freezing dew slide between your toes. The rule here is, no towels allowed. You must let the morning air dry you naturally. The doctors believe that direct contact between skin and earth grounds the wandering and chaotic thoughts. You watch the sparrows bathing in a stone trough, and for a moment, you feel no different from them, just another creature shaking off the dust of the world to start the day pure. Lunch here is also part of the cure. Pure spring water and slices of toast so hard you must chew them slowly and deliberately. This focus on mastication, combined with the post-cold bath glow, leaves your mind as clear as crystal. The heaviness in your head that you've carried for so long seems to have washed down the Institute's drains. You realize that sometimes, to heal the soul, one must put the body through its most primal paces. As the afternoon fades, you are led back to your room for post-therapeutic repose. Your body is tired in a delicious way, your skin glowing slightly from the stimulated circulation. You lie down on the simple wooden bed, listening to the distant trickle of a nearby creek. There are no more sugary opium bottles, no more stifling embroidery rooms. There is only you and the primal power of water. You think of the stone baths of the Greeks and the brick pools of the Egyptians, noticing that water has always been the companion of the restless heart. You close your eyes, feeling as though you are still buoyant in the wooden tub, supported by an invisible, cool strength. Every thought dissolves into tiny droplets, and you drift into a deep, dreamless sleep, as fresh and pristine as the mountain spring that just reclaimed your spirit. The brisk, invigorating chill of the water cure evaporates, replaced by a sudden, sharp restriction around your midsection. You find yourself standing before a tall, gilded mirror in a dressing room that smells of lavender sachet and heavy starch. It is 1885, the height of the Victorian era's obsession with the hourglass silhouette. 2 maids are currently behind you, braced like rowers in a boat, tugging on the silk laces of your corset. You feel your breath hitch, your lungs forced into the very upper chambers of your chest, and your internal organs being politely but firmly rearranged to make room for a 19-inch waist. Your doctor has diagnosed your frequent spells of anxiety and fainting as constitutional fragility, but as you look at your reflection, you realize it might just be the fact that you haven't taken a full breath since breakfast. In this era, the physical restriction of women's clothing was often indistinguishable from medical treatment. If you felt nervous or flighty, the solution was to bind you tighter, providing a structural support for your supposedly weak spine. There is a gentle humor in the medical logic of the day. They believed the female body was like a climbing vine that would simply collapse into a heap of nerves without a whalebone trellis to hold it up. You probably wouldn't survive a single afternoon in this rig without wanting to reach for a pair of scissors. Yet you are told that this compression of the spirit is exactly what a refined lady needs to remain composed. Historians still debate the extent to which corset liver and displaced ribs contributed to the era's epidemic of female fainting. But standing here, you know the truth. It's hard to have a panic attack when you literally don't have enough oxygen to fuel one. As you are finally buttoned into your heavy silk bodice, you experience the phenomenon of the elegant swoon. To feel anxious in 1885 was to be delicate, and to faint was considered almost a form of performance art. You carry a small silver-chased bottle of smelling salts, ammonium carbonate mixed with strong perfume, tucked into your sleeve. When the world feels like it's closing in, or when the lack of oxygen makes the room spin, you take a sharp, burning sniff of the salts. It's like a lightning bolt to the nostrils, a sensory jolt designed to shock the nerves back into place. It's the Victorian version of a system reboot. You feel the sting in your eyes, the sudden clearing of your head, and for a moment the anxiety is replaced by the sheer survival instinct of your sinuses. One of the lesser-known facts of this period was the use of fainting couches. These weren't just decorative furniture. They were strategically placed safety zones for women whose corsets had finally won the battle against their lungs. You find yourself reclining on one now, the sloped back supporting your shoulders while you try to take shallow, ladylike sips of air. You're told that your anxiety is a sign of your superior sensitivity, a backhanded compliment that essentially means you're too evolved for the stresses of modern life. You watch the dust motes dancing in a shaft of light, and you start to wonder if the rest you're being prescribed is actually just a way to keep you from moving around enough to realize how much your ribs hurt. The physician stops by to check your pulse and pallor. He suggests that since you are so prone to agitation, you should spend the afternoon in static repose, looking at a collection of pressed ferns. The ferns are arranged in a heavy leather book, their green fronds flattened and lifeless, much like you feel in your silk cage. There's a strange, quiet irony in the fact that the more they try to protect your nerves with layers of bone and fabric, the more trapped your spirit feels. You trace the outline of a fossilized leaf, the repetitive motion once again serving as a tether for your drifting thoughts. Between your bouts of shallow breathing, you are encouraged to practice the soft gaze. You are told to avoid looking at anything harsh or mechanical, focusing instead on the soft curves of the porcelain figurines on the mantelpiece. The rules we follow for no reason in this era include the belief that looking at a steam engine for too long could cause a rupture of the feminine calm. You obediently stare at a porcelain shepherdess, her frozen, painted smile mocking your own struggle to expand your diaphragm. You realize that your anxiety is often just a natural response to being treated like a fragile ornament. As the sun begins to set, casting long orange shadows across the floral wallpaper, the maids return to release you for the evening. The sound of the corset laces being loosened is the most beautiful music you've heard all day. As the pressure vanishes, you feel a rush of blood to your extremities and, finally, a deep, glorious, belly-expanding breath. The anxiety that felt like a tight band around your chest dissolves instantly, not because of the smelling salts or the ferns, but because you are finally allowed to be a biological creature again. You head to bed, moving with a newfound heavy grace. Your ribs ache with a dull, thrumming rhythm, a reminder of the day's structural support. You think about the water cures and the bear fat, and you realize that sometimes the greatest source of peace is simply the absence of restraint. You settle into your mattress, your lungs working with effortless, rhythmic ease. The smelling salt bottle sits on the nightstand, its silver cap glinting in the moonlight, a tiny, pungent anchor to a world that wants you to be still. You close your eyes, the memory of the hourglass fading into a vast, open space where the air is infinite and your heart has all the room it needs to beat. You drift into a deep, uncompressed sleep, breathing long, slow, and free until the dawn. The stifling weight of the silk bodice and the sharp sting of smelling salts fade away, replaced by the scent of freshly scythed hay and the distant rhythmic clink-clink of a cowbell. You open your eyes to find yourself sitting on a wide wooden porch that overlooks a valley so green it looks like it was painted by a romantic poet. It is the year 1912, and you have checked into a rural sanitarium. Your doctor, a pioneer in the new field of environmental therapy, has decided that your anxiety isn't a problem with your organs or your corset, it's a problem with the city itself. He calls it neurasthenia, or American nervousness, a condition caused by the frantic pace of the telephone, the typewriter, and the dizzying speed of modern life. Your prescription? A total immersion in the boring countryside. You are currently wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, despite the mild afternoon air, because the nerves must be kept at a steady, unchanging temperature. The physician, a man who wears tweed even in the summer, explains that the human brain was never meant to process more than 3 pieces of news per week. To rewire your exhausted spirit, you are forbidden from seeing a newspaper or hearing a clock chime. There is a gentle humour in being told that your modern intelligence is actually your biggest enemy, and that the cure for your sophisticated worries is to spend 4 hours a day watching a sheep eat grass. You probably wouldn't survive the lack of mental stimulation if you weren't so deeply, profoundly tired. One of the cornerstones of this rural cure was the shepherd's rhythm. You are encouraged to follow the movements of the local flock. In the morning, you walk at their pace. In the afternoon, you rest when they lie under the oak trees. There is a strange, hypnotic quality to the sound of 100 sheep grazing, a soft, tearing sound of grass that acts like a natural metronome. Historians still debate whether these sanitariums were the birthplace of modern mindfulness, or just very expensive ways to go bored out of your mind. But as you watch a particularly fluffy ewe contemplate a dandelion, you feel the frantic buzzing in your skull finally start to settle into a low, earthy hum. A lesser-known fact about these pre-war retreats was the colour diet for the eyes. You are instructed to spend 20 minutes every hour looking at the far horizon. The theory was that city dwellers had short-sighted souls from looking at walls and shop windows all day. By forcing your eyes to focus on a distant blue mountain or a hazy line of trees, the doctor believed you were physically stretching your nerves back to their natural length. You find yourself staring at a distant windmill, its sails turning so slowly they barely seem to move at all. The world feels immense, and your problems, which felt so jagged and sharp in the city, suddenly seem as small as a single blade of grass in that vast valley. Between your eye-stretching sessions, you are given a task that would make a Victorian lady faint: purposeful dirt contact. You are handed a small trowel and told to dig a hole, then fill it back up, then dig it again. The goal isn't to plant anything, it's to smell the damp, cool earth and feel the grit beneath your fingernails. The doctor claims that the soil is the great absorber of human electricity. You find yourself laughing softly at the absurdity of being a grown woman playing in the mud, but as you press your palms into the cool dirt, you feel a groundedness that no restroom could ever provide. You remember the Nile green, walls of the department store, and realize that nature's green is far more chaotic, yet somehow more comforting. The rules we follow for no reason at the sanitarium include the no mirror mandate. All mirrors in your room are covered with white linen. The idea is that self-consciousness is the father of anxiety. Without the ability to check your hair or worry about your pallor, you start to forget what you look like to the world. You stop being a lady with a condition and start being just another breathing thing in the valley. By evening, you are served a bowl of warm, unpasteurized milk and a piece of dark bread. It's simple, heavy, and makes you feel like you're made of stone and hay. As the sun dips below the mountains, painting the sky in long, lazy strokes of violet and gold, the sanitarium's silence begins. No talking, no music, only the sound of the wind through the tall grass. You head to your bed, which is positioned so that you can see the stars through the window. There are no streetlights here to blur the edges of the universe. You feel heavy, grounded, and remarkably boring. And it's the most beautiful feeling you've ever known. You think about the wandering uterus of Greece and the heaving heart of Egypt, and you realize that perhaps they were all just different ways of saying we were too far from the grass. You settle into your pillows, the scent of the wool blanket reminding you of the sheep you watched all day. Your thoughts aren't racing anymore, they're just wandering slowly through the valley, eventually curling up under a distant oak tree to rest. You close your eyes, the clink-clink of the distant cowbell fading into the velvet dark, leading you into a sleep as deep and unwavering as the mountains themselves. The rustic scent of hay and the sound of cowbells dissolve into the quiet, scholarly atmosphere of a dimly lit library. You find yourself sitting in a high-backed velvet chair, the air smelling of old paper, leather bindings, and a hint of candle smoke. It is the mid-19th century, and the medical world has identified a new culprit for your shattered nerves: the dangerous act of reading. Your doctor, a man who believes that a woman's brain is a finely tuned engine that can easily overheat, has prescribed you a literary fast. He explains that your anxiety is a result of fictional overstimulation, specifically caused by those sensational novels that make your heart race and your imagination wander into forbidden territories. In this era, certain books were viewed as a form of intellectual toxin. If you felt a bit of the vapours, it was often blamed on a late-night session with a gothic romance or a particularly gripping mystery. There is a gentle humour in the idea that a few chapters of a Bronte sisters novel could lead to a permanent nervous collapse, yet your physician is dead serious. He suggests that for every page of fiction you read, your brain fluid becomes more agitated. You probably wouldn't survive the irony of being told that reading is bad for you while he sits there surrounded by medical journals, but for now, you are a patient of the quiet page. You are only allowed to read calming non-fiction, such as The History of Lichens or a guide to 18th century drainage systems. One of the lesser-known facts of this period was the medical debate over novel reading fever. Some historians argue that this was less about health and more about social control, keeping women's minds away from ideas of independence or adventure. As you stare at a detailed illustration of a marsh-living moss, you feel your eyelids getting heavy. The doctor's plan is working, though perhaps not for the reasons he thinks. The sheer, unadulterated boredom of drainage systems is acting like a literary sedative. You find yourself tracing the diagram of a lead pipe, and the frantic narrative in your head, the what-ifs and if-onlys of your anxiety, begins to lose its momentum. To assist with your recovery, you are encouraged to use a book-stilled gaze. This involved placing a single, uncoloured illustration of a geometric shape on a stand and staring at it until your eyes went slightly out of focus. The goal was to empty the visual theatre of the mind. You look at a grey triangle for 10 minutes, feeling like your brain is being slowly ironed flat. There is a strange, quiet peace in being told that you don't have to think, imagine, or feel. You are being given permission to be as unstimulated as a piece of blank parchment. The rules we follow for no reason in this scholarly retreat include the belief that blue light, the light of early dawn, is the only safe time to read anything at all. You are woken up at 5 a.m., given a small candle, and allowed 30 minutes of serious study. The rest of the day is spent in mental silence. You sit by the window, watching the shadows of the trees move across the floorboards. Without a story to inhabit, you are forced to inhabit the present moment. You start to notice things you'd ignored before. The way the light catches the dust on a bookshelf, or the rhythmic creak of the floorboards as someone walks by. Historians still debate whether this bibliographic temperance actually helped anyone, or if it just created a generation of women who were incredibly knowledgeable about moss. But as you sit in the growing twilight, you realize that the absence of other people's stories has allowed your own mind to stop shouting. You aren't chasing a plot or worrying about a character's fate. You are just a person in a room, breathing in the smell of old books. The hot vapours that the doctor feared have cooled into a steady, quiet pond. As the evening settles in, a maid comes to take your book away. She locks it in a cabinet as if it were a dangerous weapon. You are led to your bed, your mind feeling light and perhaps a bit hollow. You think about the wandering uterus and the bare fat, and you decide that the poisoned book theory is just another chapter in the long history of trying to bottle up human emotion. You settle into your pillows, the darkness of the library wrapping around you like a heavy cloak. Your thoughts are no longer sentences or paragraphs, they are just fading images of lichen and triangles. You close your eyes, the quiet of the room feeling like the final page of a very long, very boring and very peaceful book. You drift into a sleep that is perfectly blank, a storyless void where your nerves can finally rest in the silence of the unwritten night. The hushed stillness of the library and the scent of old paper begin to shift, replaced by a strange metallic ozone smell and the rhythmic, low-frequency hum of a hidden motor. You find yourself in a room that feels strikingly modern for the late 1800s, draped in clinical white linens and filled with polished brass instruments that look like they belong in a clockmaker's fever dream. You are in the era of the mechanical physician. Your doctor, a man who believes that the human body is simply a steam engine that has lost its rhythm, has decided that your anxiety is a congestion of the nerves that can only be shaken loose by the power of vibration. Before you can ask for a simpler remedy, you are seated in a heavy motorized chair known as a vibratory throne. As the doctor flips a switch, a small steam engine in the next room coughs to life, and suddenly your entire world begins to tremble. It's not a violent shake, but a rapid, fuzzy oscillation that makes your teeth feel like they're made of tuning forks. The gentle humor of the situation isn't lost on you. Here you are, a sophisticated woman of the Victorian age, being jiggled by a brass machine in the hopes that it will vibrate the worry right out of your bones. You probably wouldn't survive the sheer embarrassment of this if it didn't actually feel surprisingly relaxing. This was the dawn of mechanical massage. Historians still debate whether these early vibrators were truly medical or just the first step in a very different industry, but at the time, they were the peak of electrotherapeutics. The doctor explains that your anxiety is like a stagnant pool of water, and the machine is the stone thrown into the center to create ripples of health. You find that after a few minutes, the constant hum of the motor begins to act like a physical white noise machine. The frantic, jagged thoughts in your head are literally being smoothed out by the vibration. You can't focus on your spells or your vapors when your shoulder blades are humming at 60 cycles per second. A lesser-known fact about these early clinics was the use of the percussion helmet. If the chair didn't work, a brass cap lined with tiny hammers would be placed on your head to gently tap your cranium in a rhythmic pattern. It sounds like a form of medieval torture, but the sensation was actually quite hypnotic, like the sound of rain on a tin roof, but felt directly on the scalp. You find your eyes rolling back as the tapper does its work, clearing away the mental cobwebs. The doctor claims this repolarizes the cerebral humors, a scientific-sounding phrase that essentially means he's trying to shake your brain until it forgets to be afraid. Between your mechanical sessions, you are encouraged to practice magnetic stillness. You hold 2 copper spheres connected by silk wires to a dormant battery, told that the unseen currents of the earth are flowing through you to stabilize your heart. There is a rules we follow for no reason element here, as you must keep your feet exactly 6 inches apart to avoid short-circuiting the soul. You sit perfectly still, the lingering vibration from the chair still tingling in your fingertips like a ghostly echo. The room is quiet, save for the ticking of a nearby barometer, and you feel like a clock that has finally been wound to the correct tension. The physician notes that the friction of modern life creates a static of the spirit, and only mechanical friction can rub it away. You think about the rural sanitarium and the dietary reformers, and you realize that humanity has gone from trying to be as still as a stone to trying to be as efficient as a piston. Yet in this mechanical room, you find a strange form of peace. It is the peace of the machine, predictable, rhythmic, and tireless. You are no longer responsible for managing your own emotions. You've outsourced that job to a brass motor and a set of copper wires. As the steam engine in the back slows to a halt, the silence that follows is profound. Your body feels light, tingly, and strangely numb, as if the edges of your physical self have been slightly blurred by the shaking. You are led to a resting cot where the doctor applies a cooling zinc plate to your forehead to seal in the vibrations. The cold metal is a stark contrast to the buzzing warmth of your skin, and the combination acts like a final decisive off switch for your mind. You think about the wandering uterus of Greece and the bear fat of Egypt, and you smile into your pillow at the thought of how many ways we've invented to try and shake off the shadows of the mind. You settle into the cot, the phantom hum of the motor still vibrating deep in your muscles, acting as a secret lullaby that only you can hear. Your thoughts are no longer sharp or pointed. They are just soft, fuzzy waves of silver light, oscillating slower and slower until they match the quiet, steady breath of the night. You close your eyes, the mechanical peace of the 19th century carrying you into a sleep that is perfectly calibrated, vibration-free, and deeply mechanically still. The rhythmic hum of the brass motors and the smell of ozone drift away, replaced by a vast, silent warmth and the scent of sun-baked stone and salt air. You open your eyes to find yourself reclining on a white wicker chaise longue, your skin bathed in a golden, unapologetic light. It is 1924, and you are on a sun-drenched terrace in the Swiss Alps, participating in the latest medical marvel, the solar bath. Your doctor, a man who believes that darkness is the true father of anxiety, has diagnosed you with shadow sickness. He claims that the gloom of the indoor life has caused your nerves to wilt like a plant in a cellar, and the only cure is a total, unfiltered surrender to the sun. In this era, sunlight was treated with the same precision as a surgical instrument. You aren't just sunning yourself, you are undergoing heliotherapy. Your physician has prescribed exactly 45 minutes of exposure to the morning rays, emphasizing that the actinic light of the mountains has the power to bleach the worries right out of your soul. There is a gentle humor in the fact that after decades of being told to stay pale and protected under parasols, you are now being told that your lack of a tan is practically a medical emergency. You probably wouldn't survive the confusion of this sudden flip-flop in advice if the heat didn't feel so incredibly good on your tired joints. You are dressed in a solar suit, a minimal sleeveless garment of white linen designed to let the light reach as much of your skin as possible. As the sun climbs higher over the jagged peaks, you feel a deep, penetrating warmth that goes beyond the surface. It's as if the light is melting the frozen knots of tension in your shoulders. Historians still debate the exact point when tanning shifted from a sign of manual labor to a mark of high society health, but here on the terrace, it feels like a spiritual cleansing. You watch a hawk circling in the thermal vents, and for the first time in years, you don't feel the need to do anything. You are just a biological solar panel, absorbing peace at the speed of light. One of the lesser-known facts about these alpine clinics was the use of blue glass filters. If the sun felt too aggressive, the doctor would place a sheet of cobalt blue glass over your face. The theory was that the cooling blue rays would soothe the fiery parts of your anxiety while still allowing the healing light to pass through. You lie there, looking at a world turned entirely, beautifully blue, feeling like you're submerged in a warm, shallow sea. The rules we follow for no reason in this era include the strict instruction to never speak while the sun is at its zenith, as the vibration of the voice interferes with the absorption of the rays. You happily obey the silence, letting the mountain air and the solar heat do the talking. Between your sun sessions, you are encouraged to practice rhythmic gazing. You look at the snow-capped summits, then at the green valley below, then back to the sun-bleached stones of the terrace. This exercise was believed to elasticize the optic nerve, which in turn would loosen the grip of the mind on its worries. You find yourself becoming fascinated by the texture of the wicker chair, the intricate weave, the way it creaks softly as you shift your weight. Your anxiety, which always thrived in the dim corners of curtained parlours, seems to shrivel up in this blinding, honest light. It has nowhere to hide. The physician stops by to check your solar saturation. He notes that your skin is beginning to take on a healthy, honeyed glow, which he claims is proof that your internal spirits are no longer congested. You think about the vibratory throne and the rest cure, and you realize that humanity has finally decided to just let nature take the wheel. The friction of life that the mechanical doctors worried about is being smoothed over by a giant star 93 million miles away. There is a profound cosmic comfort in that realization. As the sun begins to dip behind the peaks, casting long, cool shadows across the terrace, the solar silence is broken by the sound of a distant dinner bell. You feel heavy, warm, and strangely radiant, as if you've swallowed a small piece of the afternoon. You are led back to your room, which has been kept dark and cool to set the light into your system. You settle into your bed, and your skin feels tingly and alive, humming with a heat that doesn't belong to the room. You think about the wandering uterus and the bare fat and the stiff corsets, and you realize that every treatment was just a different way of trying to find the light. You close your eyes, and the back of your eyelids are still glowing with the ghost of the alpine sun, a soft, orange-red hue that pulses with the rhythm of your heartbeat. Your thoughts are no longer jagged shadows. They are just warm, golden dust motes floating in a vast, silent space. You drift into a sleep that is bright, warm, and infinitely deep, carried by the lingering heat of the day into a night that holds no more shadows. The golden alpine glow and the scent of sun-warmed stone slowly dissolve into a soft, hazy twilight. You find yourself in a room that feels remarkably familiar, yet pleasantly indistinct. It is the mid-20th century, the dawn of a new era of the mind. Gone are the brass machines, the bare fat ointments, and the leeches of the past. Your doctor doesn't carry a scalpel or a bottle of opium. Instead, he carries a notebook and a quiet, patient smile. He has diagnosed your anxiety not as a physical wandering or a chemical failure, but as a narrative in need of a rest. To fix your spirit, he has prescribed the most radical treatment of all, the freedom to just be yourself. You are lying on a leather sofa, the iconic analyst's couch, in a room that smells of pipe tobacco and old, well-loved novels. The air is still, but it's a living stillness, not the forced silence of the Victorian library. The physician explains that the vapours and hysteria of the old world were simply the heart's way of shouting when it wasn't being heard. There is a gentle humour in the realization that after centuries of trying to shake, bake, and freeze your anxiety away, the modern world has decided that perhaps we should just sit down and have a quiet chat with it. You probably wouldn't survive the irony if you weren't so deeply relieved to finally be allowed to speak without being told your uterus is on a road trip. As you lie there, you experience the great unwinding. You aren't being asked to thrum like a machine or starve on crackers. Instead, you are encouraged to practice free association, letting your thoughts drift like clouds across a summer sky without judging where they go. You find yourself thinking about the Nile-green walls of the department store and the clink-clink of the cowbells in the valley. Historians still debate whether this era of talk therapy was a medical breakthrough or just the first time in history that someone really listened to women. But as you speak into the quiet room, you feel the congestion in your chest finally begin to evaporate for good. One of the lesser-known facts about this transitional period was the sleep-learning craze. In some clinics, patients were given small speakers under their pillows that whispered positive affirmations or rhythmic poetry while they slept. You find a small, soft speaker tucked into the velvet of the sofa, emitting a sound like distant rain on a tin roof. The doctor claims this re-scripts the subconscious, but to you, it just feels like the world finally admitting that you deserve to be lulled to sleep. The rules we follow for no reason have been replaced by the simple rule of kindness to the self. As the session ends, you aren't sent back to a cold bath or a silk cage. You are given a warm cup of herbal tea, lavender and valerian, a gentle nod to the past, and told to go home and dream. You realize that your journey through history has been a long search for this very moment. The moment where anxiety is no longer a monster to be fought, but a guest to be understood. The heavy weight of the centuries, the corsets, the tonics, the leeches, is gone. You feel light, transparent, and profoundly at peace. The room begins to dim further, the leather of the sofa feeling as soft as a cloud. The doctor's voice becomes a distant, comforting murmur, reminding you that the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell. You think about the ancient Egyptians and the Greek poets, the Victorian bakers and the Swiss sun-seekers, and you realize you are the heir to all their quiet moments of rest. Now, as the journey concludes, you feel your breathing becoming longer and slower. The images of the day, the blue glass, the mountain peaks, the embroidery frames, all begin to blur into a soft, velvety grey. The tension in your jaw has vanished. The flutter in your heart has become a steady, deep rhythm. You are safe. You are quiet. You are exactly where you need to be. The world is becoming very small and very dark and very, very still. The last echoes of history are fading, leaving only the sound of your own steady breath and the soft, cool air of the night. You are drifting now, sliding into a space where time doesn't exist and worries have no weight. You are falling into a sleep that is vast and kind, a sleep that knows all your secrets and loves you anyway. Everything is fading, the light, the sound, the thought, just the dark, just the peace, just the deep, deep rest.